performer in the world. And I said to Joan, we need a wonderful Don Giovanni. You got any thoughts? And she said Stephen West, who Stephen was in a production of Barber of Seville in the same company. I went to hear it. It was absolutely wonderful. So I said to Dr. David, who was the general director of the company, yes, if I have Stephen as Don Giovanni and Renée as either of the ladies, and she needs to choose who she wants to be. And she said she wanted to start with Elvira. And he said, okay, I don't know if I want to build you Don Giovanni for Stephen West. I said, darling, you're not, you're building it for me. So I told you, as a youth, one comes up with these ridiculous things. But no, I wouldn't dare say that.
When you find yourself revisiting a production you've already done before, is it challenging to envision it a different way? And do you look for something like in Munich where you kind of had inspiration to see it completely differently? Or do you sometimes say to people, I'm going to do it this way, and then revisit maybe other ideas you had that you didn't get to create?
It's an incredibly important question, and something which I can only give you a yes and a no answer. And I'm not sure which the yes is and which the no is. Two responses. One, amongst my first projects was Lucrezia Borgia, Donizetti with Dame Joan Sutherland to celebrate her 30th anniversary. Then, 3 or 4 years ago, I was invited to direct and design Lucrezia Borgia with Renée Fleming in the title role. It was very difficult for me to start with to enable my instincts to have their free reign, to re-envisage this, because one of the goddesses of my youth was Dame Joan Sutherland, and I had done 6 productions with her. I did her final reproduction at Covent Garden. The Lucrezia Borgia was my debut. You can get it on DVD. It's with Alfredo Kraus, and I was the set designer on that. And it was very difficult. And it took me 6 months of really just studying the score and studying the period until I suddenly understood something that had not been part of our original production at all, and that is that violence, male violence, was the key to the show, in that the mythology surrounding Lucrezia, the person, was so prevalent at the time of Donizetti's period that she was a monster, she killed everybody, she was incredibly promiscuous, and some of the stories that were prevalent at that time made even my hair, there's not much of it, stand on end. For instance, that she was the daughter of Pope Alexander VI. I think I'm not prepared for this with facts, so I may have this wrong. She was raped by both brothers or had incestuous relationships with both brothers. The list is horrifying and long. What is certain is that she did not come from a nice family home where her childhood could be described as being anything other than extraordinarily horrifying. And the other factor which was very useful for me when I had done research on it was that the Machiavelli, the Prince, was modelled on her brother, Cesare Borgia. And when you read The Prince, and when you think about what he got up to, galloping around the whole of Italy, just grabbing castles, killing the owners, this is now my castle. Within that framework, even the possibly unsubstantiatable, thank you so much, yes, I don't want to put over these beautiful books, thank you so much, even the horror story of her life pales into insignificance. And so I suddenly realized that Lucrezia Borgia was a warrior, but a woman. And that was then my kick-off to be able to re-envisage the story. The other side, which is the no, there's no problem, is exampled by Don Giovanni production. This is not the production that I did in 1980, wherever it was, with Renée. I was asked by Placido Domingo first to redo Don Giovanni with him in, I think, 2003 or 4, and then again in 2007, and both in Washington, but two productions. And the part of it that I think is useful in response to your question is that I opened the Dallas season with Don Giovanni, with this production, this last season in September of 2010, and then just recreated the production in Florida, in Miami, we opened 2 weekends ago with a different cast. And it's the first time I've directed the same opera in the same production within 6 months of each other. And I looked forward to it enormously, knowing it was going to be different and challenging. What I didn't know was that I would be learning so much about the characterization of the different artists for the different roles from the artists with whom I'd be working. And it's something that I discovered with working with Dame Joan many years ago, when I had been, by that time I'd had quite a successful career as a director, but the reviews tended to be fantastic production and shame about the singers. And I spoke to Joan about this, who was not known as being a great actress, though if you see films of her, she was incredibly intense and felt the roles very personally, but did not have a way of being physically which communicated the intensity of her inner dramatic sense across 80 feet. The voice communicated that, but when you see video of her, she felt every word. And she said, "Oh, well, you know, John, you're so clear on what you want, we don't get a chance. You know, if you give us buggers a chance, we can tell you what we'd like to do." And I thought, oh. So that changed my way of directing. And now, I was in the second production of Don Giovanni. I was incredibly excited to find that my Don Giovanni was an incredibly different artist from the artist with whom I created it in Dallas, was Paolo Jot, who just won the Tony for his performance in South Pacific. In Florida, in Miami, when I started working with that company 5 weeks ago, the Don Giovanni, the Don Giovanni was also famous for his Broadway role in South Pacific. And I've never directed South Pacific, so forgive me, I can't remember the character's name. Emile somebody or other? Yes? Emile de Bec, thank you. So both of them were famous for this, as well as having huge international careers as opera. So I knew David was also going to be a great actor. I mean, Paolo Jot was incredible. And then when I first met David, I was actually a bit surprised, and I had difficulty adjusting my mental point of view to him, because his character was considerably more forceful and cynical in a way, and he was more intellectual in his approach. But what developed during the rehearsal was that the Don Giovanni that he created was more manipulative and had this cynical edge, and he also didn't look great in two of the costumes for which I had designed 3 or 4 years ago for Erwin Schrott, who was this incredibly handsome young man with a kind of ripped, muscular, gym-out body. So, you know, one of the costumes was chest revealing. One of David's great characteristics is not the rippling torso. It ripples when you touch it, but not as in, let me see your abs, darling. So I cut that costume, and the result was that he stayed in this 1946 ceremonial uniform for more of the show, and he also looked great in sunglasses. And I had seen some photographs of the period where a lot of the aristocrats in the sun were wearing these great sunglasses. So I gave him sunglasses, and then the other aristocrats also landed up having sunglasses. And these little tweaks sound like nothing. It was enormous. It suddenly set the show, which I had always wanted to feel like it was in the mid-40s, just after Franco had re-established the monarchy in Spain. It nailed it there. And this all came from the fact that I was working with different artists. And it's one of the treasures that I was led to discover by Dame Joan, that this relationship with artists, not being in a closed situation where I'm telling them what to do, but rather asking them questions and making suggestions about what might be possible, and then having their responses, means that it's never a problem. So yes and no. Long answer, sorry about that. Come on.
To what extent does the place where you're going to be performing an opera affect your vision for it? I mean, as in the city or the audience?
Well, I think that's the good example is Miami. When I was thinking about restaging it in Miami, the Don Giovanni that is, I was very fortunate to have the original choreographer from the production when I first did it with Placido. She was free, and she's never free because she's working at the Met the whole time. Placido Domingo had actually introduced me to her when I was first talking to him about the production. I said I wanted to have Spanish dancing in the opera, because Don Giovanni is actually set in Seville, but I never feel it is. I think that means it's time to stop blathering. And I so wanted it to feel Spanish, which in my experience, I'd never felt that Don Giovanni was set in Seville. And he introduced me to Sarah Ernie, who has since become a close friend. We've done 6 or 7 productions together, and as I said, she's never free. She was free this time, and when she came down, she was very happy to find that Miami had a tremendous strength of Spanish dancers. And when I was making judgments about sunglasses, etc., I was aware of the fact that everybody wears sunglasses all the time in the middle of the night. I mean, they wear sunglasses and they're always beautiful glasses. So there was some sense of knowing that this fascist dictator element, with so many people in Miami having contacts with Cuba, this was going to have a kind of a resonance within the space. I mean, what it also meant was that I discovered new things about the production. So I think I understand when something has a resonance for the locale, and certainly in the Flora last year, the locale was everything. It was actually the raison d'etre for the production. And the fact that we were celebrating the Beautiful Dock Street's revival, or rebirth, or whatever you wanted to call it, was an essential part of that production. It was a celebration of that at the beginning of an operatic performance in America through a vehicle of a beautifully restored theatre. So I hope I can always incorporate, because the locale means the people who are coming to see it, and without you and the audience, nothing exists. I mean, Renée Fleming can be singing, John Pascoe can be singing. If somebody's not recording it or somebody's not watching it, they might as well not bother. We just hope they're there to listen, of course. Larry.
For some reason, I have the recollection that the telephone was also Fleming's companion.
Yes, it was originally before that.
Yeah. The last few productions, like one in Monte Carlo and so forth, Carlo, was he still doing that?
We did, when we did it in 2002 in Spoleto Italy, we did it with the telephone, followed it. And then in Monte Carlo, it was paired with Carlo Rusticano. Not a John Carlo's choice, it was the management wanted that.
And there was no interest in that here, or was it discussed?
It's something that I think Nigel wanted to, you would have to ask him, but my sense from the conversation that we had, my recollection of that conversation was that the medium of itself was so strong that any addition to it, if you have the perfect diamond, you don't need to put other diamonds around it. And I think I found that Nigel's instincts are pretty good, and I was very excited to follow them. I didn't say no, like I used to with John Carlo. No, it seemed like the right choice, because it's very short, it's very intense. And what was interesting when one had the telephone after it, the telephone, by the way, is amazingly funny and witty and saucy. And when we were doing it, I said to Gian Carlo, he said, so what do you want to do with the telephone? I was designing it only. But by that time, he was happy to take input from me. And the telephone starts with a young couple who are in love, but their conversation is constantly, for those people who don't know it, is constantly interfered with by the telephone, which is constantly ringing. And finally, the only way the young man can get to speak to her is by leaving and phoning her and speaking to her on the telephone. It's very witty, very funny. And it starts with the girl saying, "Thank you, that was just what I wanted." And I said to Gian Carlo, why don't we have it so that there's a double bed upstage, and all we see at the beginning of the show is kind of rumpled legs and pillows flying around, and then her crawling up, just getting out of bed, saying, "Thank you, that was just what I wanted." And he again said, "Oh, it's wonderful, you must do that sometime, but I'm too old." Whether I told that story to Nigel before he said we were doing the telephone or not, I don't know. Maybe I did. I think we need to move on, don't we?
Yeah, is there another question?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you started out with a more or less conventional approach to your career and then morphed into something more contemporary?
Yes.
And how did you transition, or what made you?
Well, I got older. I mean, I think it's interesting that we always think of teenagers, etc., as being completely wild. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be a middle-aged man and live in a great mansion. I mean, I'm now a middle-aged man living in a great mansion. I can't afford it, but I am. But no, as I got older, I just found I needed to challenge myself. I think, at a certain stage, I've been doing this for 34 years or something, at a certain stage, one is aware of the fact that unless you get more challenges, you're going to die on your feet. I mean, at the moment I'm just starting to, not that I will ever do this, don't fear, but I'm just starting to work on my voice, because there's a small character role in Manon, which I'm doing, not the character role, I'm directing and designing in Washington in a couple of years' time, and I want to see if I can sing this tiny character role, and it's for a dancing master. It's a high tenor, and I pretend to sing in rehearsal. And I love singing, so my current challenge is see if I can actually get to a stage of actually being on stage as well. Do it all, love.